is my printed signature. Okay, got it. Okay.
Okay, great. Before we begin, actually, could you clip this on your collar?
Okay.
The microphone. Okay,
Okay.
perfect. And before we begin, I'll just let you know what this project is generally about, if you don't know too much about it. So, my name is Daniel. I'm part of the BLC program, Building Landscapes and Cultures program, over at the architecture program over at UWF. I'm not from Milwaukee. I'm not from Wisconsin. I just graduated. I just got my BA over by a small college over by Philadelphia.
Okay.
But my family's over in Fargo, North Dakota.
Okay.
There's right, and I heard I'm interested in architecture.
Okay.
I'm interested in oral history, so I'm part of this summer program.
Okay.
This project is about, so I'm responsible, my teammates and I are responsible for a documentary film, a short documentary film about Downer Avenue.
Okay.
And we're interested in collecting as many interviews as possible to kind of get a collective understanding of what this
Okay.
space means. So as the individuals who will be creating the film, we're very keen on trying to create something that will be meaningful, not just for us, for the sake of experience, but something that the individuals in the community will appreciate.
Okay.
And so, yeah, largely I'll be asking you questions about your relationship with the community here in St. Martin specifically,
Okay.
and also how your experiences with this space and how,
Okay.
etc. So.
Okay.
Okay, great. So, I might not verbally, I might not say much because I don't want to interrupt you for the sake of the recording. But I just wanted to let you know that at times it might be a little bit awkward because I can only nod. I can't say.
Okay.
For the sake of clear.
For the sake of
yeah.
conversation, in terms of conversation continuing.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Exactly.
Okay, I'll try to remember
I
just to keep
yeah.
to keep going until I'm either done or I think.
Yeah. I don't want to surprise you that I'm all of a sudden mute or something.
Okay.
So, okay. Great. So, could you please state your name and probably your experiences over Milwaukee and to Downer?
Okay, my name is VinceKatter. I've been involved in this area for about 26 years at this point. When my family moved to Milwaukee back in 1987, we were going to an Episcopal church in Madison, Wisconsin, and we talked to some friends, and we said, we're moving to Milwaukee. I've got a new job. We had our first kid had been born. Actually, our first two kids had been born, and we were looking for a church, and we got recommended to go to St. Mark's, and we walked in the door here after moving one Sunday morning, and this was in 1987, and we had just a wonderful experience. We got welcomed by everyone in the congregation. We especially remember a lady by the name of Hazel Bellis, who had lived in the neighborhood for a very long time, with a house on Downer Avenue. Her granddaughter still goes to this church, and she was one of those archetypal little old ladies with snow white hair and still a clutch purse in the late 80s, and took us by the elbow and introduced us to everybody in the congregation that first Sunday. And so we essentially came here and never went anywhere else to church. So our involvement in the neighborhood has been, for myself and my family, has been through St. Mark's. At the time, we lived in River West over on Humboldt Boulevard, and so it was a little bit of a walk and relatively short drive to come over here to church at St. Mark's, and we lived in that place for approximately 3 years, and then moved over to the west side of Milwaukee, but still maintained our church membership here at St. Mark's. And over the years we've kind of seen a variety of phases, both with the neighborhood of Downer Avenue and with the membership of St. Mark's. I mean, as you can see, if you walk around the church, it's a fairly it's meant to evoke an English country church in a number of ways, especially the 1911 sanctuary building with the stone, etc., and the courtyard. The 1950s building, which is what we're sitting in right now, is a little bit more of a, in the 1950s, I need to put up a building, it's brick, it looks pretty solid, institutional. But we've remained connected to this because of how the community has evolved through time. It started off as St. Mark's started off as a mission of St. Paul's back in the late 19th century. It became a very large the social church to go to through the 30s, 40s, and 50s, very large membership. That has declined since like the middle 60s and 70s for a variety of reasons that from Protestant church history, you can do some additional research on that. But the community has always been very welcoming, and it has evolved now through, and we've seen it evolve through, I think, into the 2000s of ready to keep going with the East Side, and kind of how the East Side has changed as well from back in the 50s and 60s of being, very much this is where the wealthy live, to I think some portions of the 80s and 90s where a lot of the other houses got turned into, kind of went through the rooming house sort of thing that you can see here, both in the Concordia neighborhood and some other places. And then as that kind of changes back in the late 90s and the teens, as the East Side has become more of that's a pretty nice place to live from that standpoint. So we've seen that change as well, and we've seen that in the church as well. Experiences of, goodness, walking around Downer Avenue over the past 25 years and seeing the different merchants and storefronts come and go. We've had people talk about the old coffee trader space for a number of years, and like, what would go into that? And the current, I think, retail renaissance, I think at portions of block, is really something we have looked for some time, or some time over the last maybe about 5-6 years ago, just prior to the downturn. It was looking a little tough for Downer in terms of the retail establishments there, and but now it seems to be coming back as the economy comes back and people continue to move into the East Side, and that's all good for us. What else can I say about St. Mark's and about the area? We have a lot of people that still live in the area, and that in terms of, we've got, like us, church members that have started off coming here and then have moved out, but still moved out to different areas of Milwaukee, but still travel here for church. And we're now seeing a number of folks who live in the area and are essentially walk-ins, can walk to church, coming in the doors from that standpoint, as church growth for many denominations is kind of one of those interesting sorts of things. Both us, Church in the City, which is just across the green space from us, Lake Park Lutheran in the area, have gone through, I think, a variety of ups and downs over the past 15 to 20 years in terms of church membership, as people sort themselves out and say, now that church membership is no longer well, that's just what you do, like in the 50s and 60s and prior. to, so what do I really want to do? And that's still kind of evolving, I think, and as we see that with people that move into the East Side and decide, what am I going to do on Sunday mornings? What am I going to do when I have kids? What do I do when I'm no longer in my mid-20s and I don't feel immortal anymore? So that's one of the things I think we exist here for people to kind of grapple with and to try and be we have a lot of groups that are in the community that use this building and this space that we maintain. We had a decision, a pretty clear one in terms of the church community about, let's see, it's 2013, probably about 10 years ago in terms of where we were going to go with the space. We'd had a child care program in the church space for a number of years that was very popular, and it came to one of those decisions where they needed to have changes done to the building that in order to further their program. We couldn't have the changes made to the building and still maintain a church in it and function from our own standpoint. And that was one of those, everyone likes everyone else, but it's a hard decision to make in terms of what's going to be the best for both organizations. It left us with the existing 1950s building that we're sitting in right now, and a challenge of, so what do we do with this? It's kind of a big 20,000 square feet. We need to use it in some fashion, and I think what we've been able to do is we've have a lot of community groups, AA groups, exercise groups. It's been a meeting place for a number of significant community events in the Downer neighborhood over the past 5 years. Discussions about the parking lot going up across on the where the Associated Bank is right now. Discussions about condo heights that might have been coming in the area. From that standpoint, we've been happy to host that. We've currently got a UWM cooking class going on in our kitchen, which is fascinating. During this winter months here, I'd come to choir on Wednesday nights at about 7 o'clock, and they would just be finishing up whatever they were fixing. And it was usually, actually, pretty much all the time, it was like, wow, that really smells good as you walk in the door and you're about to go sing. You've got 20 or so, 20-somethings finding their way around some pots and pans in our kitchen here with and the instructor saying, okay, here's what you need to do next with this type of food prep, and a lot of fun to watch. In terms of other things with the neighborhood and with St. Mark's.
Could I ask you a follow-up?
Sure.
Could you try to describe the feeling that you had or that you got when Mrs.
Hazel Bellis.
When she took you around and introduced you?
Well, we were. Whenever you go into a new congregation, even if there's a difference if you're not a member of the denomination already, there's a certain amount of like, what's going to happen to me? You walk in the doors of a church and, how do they do things here? In the Episcopal Church, we certainly have this, do I stand up? Do I sit down? What do I read? Where am I going to find what words to sing in the hymns? Am I doing it right from that standpoint? We were fairly lucky in that we had already had some background in the church. My wife was a lifelong Episcopalian. I came to the church after we got married, and after you have your first kid, as I was saying earlier, there's one of those things you kind of have that experience of, okay, I'm not just myself here. I've got this family and I've got children, so what do we need to do to help bring them up? And from that standpoint. And Hazel made us feel very welcome, and as totally new people, but like she'd known us for a while and was just very, um, very hospitable without being overbearing or without being judgmental or without being well, now you have to do this. It was you know, my wife and I are products of moving around a lot. Her father was in the Army. My father worked for defense contractors, so we moved around a lot when we were kids, and we spent some time in the same spot. So we're fairly like used to going into new situations. But it was very comforting to have someone who is, you know, I just want you to want to introduce you to people and help you to get to know the folks that are at the church here. And she succeeded in that, and we felt welcome, and our kids felt welcome, and we've been coming here ever since. St. Mark's has in terms of the community, we have we're a pretty diverse community from that standpoint, but we have a large number of folks that are both, we've got professors from UWM, we've got professors from Marquette, we've got, we've had a history of having pastors here who have been pretty, pretty intellectual from that standpoint. Julian Hills, Reverend Julian Hills, who is currently up at the rector of St. Simon's, the Fisherman in Port Washington, is a theology professor at Marquette, and he preached here probably once a month throughout the late 80s into the 90s until he left to go up and support that community up there. Peter Wenner, who was the rector of the church during the time, also preached, and the two men were both very good, both tremendously different. Julian was a New Testament scholar of the Jesus Seminar and published, had published works on here's, what this fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls means in context with early Christian theology from that standpoint. So very kind of high up in Christian scholarship and historical scholarship, and he would preach from the pulpit. Peter Wenner was a guy who preached from the middle of the church without notes, and we would get both of those different types of significantly different and valuable preaching styles throughout throughout that period of time. And that's one of the things I remember from that time. We've then have David Pfaff, who is now canon to the ordinary for the Diocese of Milwaukee, was our rector. And he preached from the middle of the aisle as well, and I think from his standpoint, he was coming from a parish in Massachusetts and found in us a community that was open to a lot of ideas about the Episcopal Church and about Christianity from that standpoint, and his preaching, I think, had a chance to flower and develop here as well. Our current rector, April Behrens, has come to us from a variety of places. The Diocese of Washington, where she was involved in the Washington National Cathedral along with her husband. We're pleased to have her. And we've also, I think, had, in terms of her preaching as well, of having both our first woman rector as of the church and having the viewpoint of a female who's a mom, who became a mom here, is actually a mom for the second time right at the moment. She's on her maternity leave right now. And having that viewpoint as explaining the scriptures and the events of the world to us, and bouncing back on top of, what the news of the day brings to us and how we respond to that in the church. So we've been really pretty blessed, I got to say, over the last 20, 25 years in terms of people and leaders here at the church and priests that we've had.
What do you think grounds you here?
I find myself, the place feels at this point like a second home. A lot of these people, I've said this, it's like an extended family. One of the things that you, if you kind of have to allow it to happen in a church, I mean, you can, in a church environment, you start looking at the other folks in the congregation as essentially as brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles to your kids, etc. They know you more and more as you go through the years, and you know them as well, so you can have closer conversations and interactions with them about how they're doing and about what's happening in their lives, and they in yours, similar to you might have with the members of your own family. And also because they're not actual members of your family, they've got significantly different viewpoints because of their past experiences that are often really valuable in comparing against what you would normally say, here's how I'm going to respond to this situation. And you have the benefit of them telling you, well, here's how I think you might want to think about that, or here's what I did when I was in your position. It's been a real blessing. It's been something I hope to continue to be a part of for. I'm in my mid-50s now, for at least another 20, 30 years from that standpoint. I'm assuming I'm going to be here in Milwaukee. But with this day in the economy, you never know what might happen. But it's a family sort of feeling. As they say, in terms of we talk about how you live out your faith, and that one of the things that this place has really taught me is that you do that in the context of interacting with other people. You always have to kind of test, here's what I think about something, in terms of, there's plenty of controversies and whatnot that come up during the day, and or people that you meet, and you talk with the rest of the folks in your congregation, and you work with them on doing something, and you see how they respond to that, and might challenge each other a little bit on that. But that's how we believe the work of God gets done, is by people like us trying to figure out, well, here's what I'm feeling, what are you feeling, how might we address that in the best way? And that it's not, sometimes it's really pretty straightforward, and sometimes that's not easy to try and work through how you come to that way forward.
What would your thoughts be if, since you're speaking to a sense of community that St. Mark's fosters, how would you feel if this church was relocated outside of Downer? Let's say someone said, we're moving the church, this is becoming something else. How would you describe your initial reaction to that?
It would be unfortunate. There's a part of the physical nature of coming into a particular community that and building. We are people that respond to cues of, these are the trees, these are the buildings, if you come from the west side of Milwaukee, this is the temperature change that happens right about at the U.S. Bank building as you come over here, so you know that the weather's different and you're in a slightly different spot. It would be tough. The church itself it's a beautiful church. It evokes a lot of the, from an Episcopal standpoint, the attempt to combine a traditional sense of ritual and liturgy, and modern responses to some of the things that are going on in the world. Changing the building, it may happen. I don't know that it would happen right now in terms of from that standpoint, but that always is kind of a big change for people. One thing to kind of address that a little bit is that St. Mark's was a mission church of St. Paul's, which is to our south, back in the 19th century. St. Christopher River Hills was a mission church of St. Mark's in the, as I understand it, in the late 1950s. So there's some historical precedent for if there's a need, a perceived wanting in a new area, or given some history that we've had so far, a parting of ways of people within the congregation that say, I think I feel this particular way about this particular subject, and other folks feel a different way. They may decide to go off and start a new congregation. That's always pretty challenging when that happens, but it would change things, I think. People are the key portions of a congregation, and it would be those folks reacting to, I'm no longer in the building that I really remember. I'm no longer in the area that I really remember. And that would take some time to kind of for people to work through, I think. Probably as if with anything gets moved, you'd have a sense of being uprooted for some time until the new roots formed wherever that was. Let's see, what else can I tell you about?
What kind of value does it add? Does St. Mark's add to Downer? Or does it not?
It's a good question. Over the years, that's changed, I think, quite a bit. In terms of my experience, and some of this is by hearsay, is that for quite some time there was Downer Avenue, and then there was the church, and there wasn't really a lot of interconnectedness between the two. I think folks, so they go to church, they might go to Sendik's to buy something for lunch or dinner, but the two entities, the merchants and the church, really didn't, I think, interact that much. But as Downer was going through some of its kind of ups and downs in terms of the retail tenancy over the past maybe 15 or 20 years, and I'm trying to think of when this happened. I think it was actually during David Fast's time, but I could be incorrect. The Downer Merchants Association and St. Mark's rector and the wardens at the time started talking on a regular basis. I think we went over and either introduced ourselves as we should be on your, we would at least like to interact with you on your Merchants Association, probably as a result of an event. I'm thinking of the previous occupants of Cafe Hollander having a music event that we came and were surprised by and said, well, I think we need to go talk to these folks. And from that comes the, okay, let's include the church in what we're planning to do, and the church will include us in what they're planning to do. And that's really grown a lot over the years in terms of when I was speaking earlier about some of the a place to hold meetings about public events. That's where they've recognized St. Mark's is a place for us to say, for us and for the aldermen and for other folks, say if we've need to have a public conversation about something, we're willing to have it here. We participate with them actually now reasonably closely on events, and the Downer Avenue bike race that's coming up here is one of those where we've been talking with them extensively, and they with us, and there's a lot of events coordinated with us, Church in the City, Epicos, to kind of make the whole bike race hoopla as fun and as interesting as possible. So that's all to the good. I hope that keeps going.
What are the type of exchanges? So in preparation for the bike race.
We have our rector and our deacon, especially Deacon Michelle, which you may have talked to. She lives right across the street from the church and has been instrumental in talking to and maintaining contact with the Downer Merchants Association. In terms of specific for the bike race, I know they've talked at least 3 or 4 times this year so far. Our parish administrator, Stacy Roller, also talks with the folks over there on a fairly consistent basis. So we've have joint plans in terms of here's the bike race that the bike race organizers are going to run. St. Mark's and the combined churches are doing things on our green space. We've got a kids sprint that we're registering for. Our deacon will go over and bless the bikes at the beginning of the major races. We do a corn roast here for the bike race that supports our outreach ministries. We sell roasted corn, go through several hundred years each time, and all that money goes for outreach ministries in the area in Milwaukee and some around the world. And we have a really pretty good time. So.
Going outside of St. Mark's, do you spend much time shopping over on?
I tend to spend, the places I will go shopping would be, we frequently run over to Downer Hardware, and we have an account there. So, you know, you've got an old church and an old parish hall. I'm on the Buildings and Grounds Committee, so it's pretty frequently that on a Saturday morning we walk in, we see, okay, here's what we need to fix. Go over to Downer Hardware, see if you can get something over there to fix it, and or CVS. And so we will interact with them quite frequently just on church business. From also on church business, we have arrangements with Breadsmith. I mean, we have the north end of our parking lot is rental parking. Breadsmith has one of the spots there. We have used their bread in our Sunday morning coffee hours every so often. So we shop there for both church use, and then I shop there for taking bread home. Downer Liquor is our wine supplier for parish events at that standpoint, so we interact with them. A lot of people that kind of once they come to the church and they're comfortable with kind of like, this is our church, they see, oh, you know, you've got Downer Cinema, you've got Boswell Books as places to, I've come to church and now I'm done, I'm going to go over to one of those spots, as well as Cafe Hollander. From that standpoint, it's actually been a pretty nice addition. One story, the church doors are red right now. They used to be, for a lot of the history of the church, they used to be essentially brown stained wood. They became, we decided about, oh goodness, I think about 5 years ago, that we needed to make St. Mark's pop a little bit more on the street, just a little more visibility from that standpoint. One, because, you know, there was also the varnish on the doors was getting old, and we looked at, okay, this is going to take, the doors are all custom made more than 100 years ago, etc. They're very expensive to replace. Trying to get the varnish to strip them and get the varnish perfect would have been prohibitively time consuming and expensive. So we said, well, you know, there's a tradition of painting church doors red. So we got a color that everyone liked, which is no small task in a church community. What shade of red should we paint the doors? Doors got painted, and as one of those happy circumstances of location, we did it during the summer. It was like June, July, and August. We did the 3 major outside doors, and the fact that Cafe Hollander was there after each door painting session to go over and have a beer and look at what you had done was one of those great outcomes to an afternoon of work, I have to say. So that's we take advantage of the merchants on Downer for a lot of different things. We'll be selling corn on the street during the bike races with their participation and permission and cooperation coming up in about a week. So.
Do you have any outside, not as a church member, for personal grocery shopping, for example? Do you ever use do you use Sendix? Did you use Sendix?
We go. My wife and I will go to Sendix periodically. We typically shop elsewhere, outside of, since we live over on in Washington Heights at 59th and Garfield. So for us, the drive is down 41, 94 up the lake to here. If we're walking around after church, that's when we're typically going to use Sendix. What we tend to do is, because we've been longtime church members, is and parking here is sometimes challenging. Since we're known, come here, you can park next to the church, go over to Cafe Hollander, go over to the Downer Theater, go over to Boswell Books, and shop there. So it's handy.
So when you speak of the changes over the last 15 years, and you speak of when you speak of these changes, are they mostly related to the church's relationship with these different merchants, or are they personal experiences of how do these changes affect you personally, I guess?
From my standpoint, the personal changes have been, when we first got here back in the 80s, the Coffee Trader was a little bit of a destination after church, or if you wanted to just hang out and do something, you'd go over there. When that closed, people were a little, now what am I going to do type of thing. And it took a while for that space to get filled with other vendors, with other businesses.
Could you go back?
Sure.
Sorry.
When we first got here in '87, going over to the Coffee Trader, I remember as one of the things that we would do, and as a place to hang out after church. We were living in River West at the time. The existing Altera coffee place was not there, so it was really come on over. You go to church. There's a little bit of coffee hour after church on Sunday, but the Coffee Trader was kind of like one of the closest. Okay, I'm just going to go hang out, see people. When that closed and there was kind of an empty space for really a number of years, that was pretty challenging. From the, you'd look at Downer and you'd go, okay, hope something goes in there. We were glad when Via opened up and when the Pancake House opened up there. My wife and I have had dinner at Via a number of times. We think they're great. They've done catering for us for a number of our parish events over the last maybe 4 or 5 years. We're doing some fundraising, and they really did a very nice job with catering and appetizers with that. So it's been that's been positive. Looking forward to Pizza Man showing up in the corner. Um, Construction, that'll be a great addition. We had, oh goodness, there was a Licks Custard was across the way there for a number of years, and we would go there every so often in the summertime after we came out of church. When our kids are now in their 20s and they're all off doing their own thing, but 15 years ago, that would have been something to say, okay, we're done with church, let's go over and have a cone there. Then Jake's Big Dogs was there for a little bit, and now that Pizza Man is there, I think it should be great. It's a shame that Chancery closed. I hope something goes into that space into Downer. Einstein's Bagels, that was down just beyond them, was a place we frequented pretty frequently when we were here because, frankly, I like bagels a lot. But apparently that wasn't able to make it. And I have a lot of. There was one of those. It was glaze your own pottery. I mean, they would have pottery blanks. I'm trying to think of the right name for the type of store, but you would have plates or dishes or platters that were of green semi-fired clay, and they would help you glaze it and do your own patterns and stuff on it. And I have kids that went to the art schools here in Milwaukee, Elm Creative Arts and Roosevelt and High School of the Arts. So at the time, they thought that was absolutely the greatest thing. So I've got a huge collection of hand-painted plates. My wife and I hand-painted plates and platters from the kids from basically about the late 90s through about 2002, 2003. And they had really enjoyed doing that. And unfortunately, they closed. So I'm hoping for something to go into that space as well. I mean, there's opportunities there as retail comes back. I work for Boston Store downtown, so I've been involved in retail for a long time. I'm in information technology and have been in the buying offices, et cetera. So I know that both individual proprietor stores from that standpoint and or corporate locations have got differing types of what is it going to take for this location to make sense economically for whatever my organization is from that standpoint. And so it's been both from a personal and a church standpoint interesting to watch Downer Avenue merchants come and go and who maintains a presence and who comes and then closes their doors over the years, as well as just both from personal shopping and then from my understanding of retail management over the years and seeing, okay, how are they doing that and how successful do they appear to be and what tactics have they used that somebody else didn't use from that standpoint. So it's been a very nice little microcosm surrounded by, residential of some of the challenges of having, I got to have a storefront, I got to attract customers, and I got to be relevant to what they want to go buy, and how that changes with people's sense of where's my destination shop, where's a destination shopping experience that I want to pursue. So the fact that North Avenue changed character pretty dramatically in the last, say, 10 to 15 years as well, with the upgrade of like Whole Foods going in, Beans and Barley getting kind of burnt down and being rebuilt, a number of, the bars kind of expanding and Von Trier getting redone, Ian's Pizza, etc. And so that's kind of raised the game a little bit, and Downer has had to kind of go, oh, okay, I've got to kind of compete with that, and I think they're, saying, oh, that's what I have to do. So it's been interesting to watch. It's been very, like, okay, what are they going to do in response to that? And that's been kind of the interesting part of it.
But putting yourself in the position then as a chain who's trying to make its way into Downer. How do you think an outsider would see the target audience or make up the Downer community?
Oh, there's from a the challenges is what we've seen in terms of from the income level and the occupancy level and kind of the population level around St. Mark's Church is really, and in the down areas, it's a pretty high-end, if you look at the census statistics, we've got a pretty high-end income level, number of people there, and so that you have to kind of trend upwards, I think, from that standpoint. You also have a large number of folks in the community that don't have a lot of money for a variety of reasons. You've got a lot of students up at UWM. You've got people in the River West area that are in between Holton and the river and the rest, and other portions of the somewhat Lower East Side that aren't quite as high end as you go just maybe 4 or 5 blocks towards the lake from that standpoint. So you've got a really pretty wide range of customers. So from a chain standpoint, that's tough. Speaking as a person who isn't a chain but has a retail model of having a lot of existing stores in a variety of different configurations, that and whose model is, well, let's study the existing market that we think we have an opportunity and build something to suit. That's not always the model for a lot of chain retailers. I've got my store, I've got my planogram, I've got various sizes I can put in. It really depends on whether they've got the flexibility to rearrange their store model to fit an open space from that standpoint, and whether their merchandising capabilities can differentiate their stock sufficiently to try and attract what they think is the right, or address what they think are the customers in that area. So I think it's a fairly challenging environment for a chain from that standpoint to try and assort it. I would find it challenging to assort correctly if I were trying to put a chain thing. I think that's why you have of the merchants that are on Downer, you've got Starbucks, which is a national chain, which actually pretty closely parallels the kind of the customer base, typical Starbucks customer, typical East Side Downer basis. They're fairly similar. I think from the standpoint, personal opinion, CVS saw an opportunity to have a drugstore there, and it's wide enough reach that I think it can do okay, but it's not as high end as it might otherwise be for some of the folks in the area. And everyone else is fairly custom from that standpoint. I think the guys that run Hollander have found a pretty decent business model that caters to the kind of the edge communities of Milwaukee and Bayview, East Side, and Wauwatosa from that standpoint in terms of their customer models. So it's one of those things where really understanding the market helps. And if you're local and you can do that, that's great. If you're a chain and you have really good local people to tell you, here's what you need to do, that'll work out okay. If you're a chain and you say, okay, cookie cutter B, I think that's a little challenging. So
the feeling that I get is that Downer, especially from previous interviews, everything you needed was on Downer.
You could do an awful lot there. I mean, in terms of I could walk to, I mean, from a daily sort of thing, you could go, I can go to Sendik's for grocery, floral, go across the street to Downer Liquor, I can go down to Starbucks for coffee, I can go to Boswell's, and previous to that, Schwartz for books. So you could spend a lot of, you could basically stay right here, and I think there are people that still do that from that standpoint. It's certainly possible. I don't know that it's, I don't know that there is the same level of exclusivity, and that's the island where you can do that now that the North Avenue reconstruction and kind of upgrade has happened. So there's that sense of, oh, yeah, I can do that on Downer. I can also do that a little bit farther down on North, and it's really a question of, do I want to get in the car, do I want to walk, etc. If I want to just be on by foot, and I live over on, between Lake Drive and Oakland or Maryland, yeah, it would be a perfectly straight, place to do that from that standpoint.
It feels like when you talk about how you would go grab a beer after painting the doors.
Mm-hmm.
The people used to hang out over at Coffee Trader after service, licks and such on that. Many ways, the community that's built inside of St. Mark's is also aided by what occurs outside. The community kind of transfers outside.
To some degree, I will. One of the things as a church, I mean, we've made a concerted effort to try and reach out to the Downer merchants and to the neighborhood. Many of us live in the neighborhood. Some of us, like me, are imports from the west side, but we spend a fair amount of time over here. But there's certainly a lot of people for whom St. Mark's is like, oh, okay, there's that building with those red doors on the other side of the street from that standpoint. So the difference in the church versus today versus, say, 50 years ago is that almost everybody living in the neighborhood would have been, I think, much more aware of the church from that standpoint. One of the things that our goal is, there's a lot of people that use Downer from that standpoint, especially Cafe Hollander, that, quite frankly, are not into the church-going experience at this point in their lives. I was like, I don't know if I need that. I'm not sure what I would do there. What do they offer me? A variety of things for a variety of reasons. So one of our challenges is, how do we reach out to them so that if they have that epiphany of, maybe I should consider doing that, we're available for them. And then the right way to reach out to say, look, we're here, and you should probably think about coming, and address those questions of, why would I go to church? Well, what's in it for me? I mean, why would I do that type of thing? That's, I think, where we are right now in terms of answering that with our own stories, frankly. It's about and in case anybody, it's always one of those things of the, you can tell, here's what it feels like to me for a particular experience, but until somebody has that epiphany of, what am I doing here? From that standpoint, it's kind of hard. It's either a familiar sort of, it's what I've always been doing from that standpoint, or people feel a need to say, this is what I've been doing haven't been involved in church ever, and I'm curious about it, but it's not important until they come up with one of those big questions in life, and they go, I'm not sure I've got a good answer. Okay, maybe I should go talk to them, one of those other folks. So there are different places in Milwaukee, and Milwaukee certainly has that background of having bars on every corner, and essentially you could basically just walk from your living room to the bar and hang out there forever. I've not had that experience on Downer, and I think, Hollander is for us, it's a nice spot to have. We'd have some small meetings there from that standpoint. In the summertime especially, hanging out on the point, having a beer after something that we've done here at the church is a great experience. but it's not like the old where he's, you know, the 5 and dime tap where basically you go and you spend 3 or 4 hours, you know, in the afternoon. We're we all got pretty busy lives from that standpoint, so tough to do that these days. Let's see. So we've talked about my experiences with the church. We've talked about some of my experiences with Downer. Let's see. Downer became a historic district actually in the recent past. And one of the things the church was involved with was we became aware of the effort to make it a historic district. I think this was about 10, I'm going to get the dates wrong, 10, 15 years ago. Went through the city council because we were going to be part of it in terms of as a historic example of English church architecture, as I believe it was phrased as from that standpoint. And because it was a way of retaining a number of the architectural features, the old garage. I think there's some friezes along some of the buildings that reference the old garages that used to be on the second floor of some of the buildings on Downer. So we were in favor of that, and then it came time for us to put in our new sign, or actually get a new sign. We used to have a sign on the church from the 1911 building that was physically attached to the church. It was approximately maybe 2.5 feet wide, maybe about 4 feet tall, as far as I can tell. I had never actually seen it, but you can see the bolts that are in the limestone that used to hold it in place. That disappeared long ago. We had a replacement sign that was a fairly plain, a flat wooden sign that was in the front green area right at the corner of Downer and Bellevue and Hackett. That didn't really have, it was just painted, it had the word St. Mark's Church and the current name of the rector and service times, but no movable letters, no nothing that would change with. And so it came time for us to go say, gee, we'd like to do a new sign. Then the fact that it was a historic building district came back to say, well, you can't have a sign that has internal illumination, you can just have a sign that has external illumination. So we were in the position of saying, okay, well, let's go find a sign that fits with that. We found one. Doesn't have any illumination at all, which made that a little bit less expensive. And we put that in place from that standpoint. And I think that helped kind of, there's both the aspirational aspects of the historic district and the practical aspects when you have to actually go, now I have to change something and make sure that it reasonably models what's going on. So you have to get that extra thought process going to say, okay, how's this going to look next to a 100-year-old building? So, reasonable experience. Although there were certainly people at the time that were kind of going, oh goodness, couldn't I have had an internally illuminated sign? It's like, yeah, well, not the end of the world.
This is going a little bit back, but
Sure.
I'm curious to ask you, since you mentioned that you traveled around a bit, or you moved around along with your wife. I'm curious how you would describe Downer's relationship with the church. Or the sense of community that you feel here in relation to Milwaukee or in relation to Downer, whatever it may be. What makes Downer Downer? What makes St. Mark's in relation to Downer and St. Mark's?
It really, I think, in terms of for my personal experience, it's really the first. I gotta think here for a second, but there's the places that I've been. Going back to the you could get almost everything you needed here. It really has been that, even though for us, if we had moved into, say, one of the condos or houses within a couple blocks of Downer, it might have been more of a more immediate sort of thing. But since we came to church pretty regularly, it was clear, yeah, you could go to church, you could go to Sendik's, do grocery shopping, which we did for a number of years because we lived over here, and you could go home. You didn't have to go anywhere else. And that sense of, it was as this kind of this little island that you could say, I don't really need to go a lot of other places. And I think that whether the meaning to or not, the notion of a small village from that standpoint is that if you lived close enough, which a number of people do in the parish, you could walk to church, you could walk to get your groceries, you could walk to go to the movies, you could walk to get a book, you could walk to get clothes, and really you'd have to get on the bus or something to go downtown. Only really if you needed to go to the courthouse or the post office or what have you. Pretty infrequent from that standpoint. I think that for what we've seen is that being kind of a central theme a number of decades ago. A little bit of a backing off of that as cars became a lot more important and people drove all over the place and had a little bit less sense of neighborhood. And I think in terms of some of the things that Downer has gone through in the late 80s and 90s, et cetera. And then as people started migrating back into the east side and finding this area around Downer as being really a very nice spot to buy a house or get an apartment, is that starting to come back in terms of that. I can do everything without running all over the place. So people in the condos here that are just across the street from us and on Hackett, I think, really have that sense strongly. And a number of the folks up and down on the streets that surround Downer and Hackett and Bellevue. And it's been, in terms of the relationship with St. Mark's with that, has been a little of a little bit more of a recognition of, I hope they do as well as they can because we're connected to that, even though that connection is not always super obvious. I think for us, the fact that you've got I was mentioning earlier, as we look out at people, there's a lot of people, say at Cafe Hollander on a sunny afternoon, and you go, oh, yeah, all those folks there. And some of them didn't go to church. A lot of them didn't go to church. As far as in St. Mark's, they may have gone somewhere else, or they may not have gone to church at all. But there's still a lot of people in the area that have opportunities in terms of, from our standpoint. And it's always better to have a thriving community right outside your door than not, from that standpoint. And I think one of the challenges back in the 90s was, and as we went through the economic downturn, is the feeling of, well, if people need to move out, that's not going to be good for the church or Downer, or either one of them.
Final question.
Okay.
So we, as mentioned before, so not everyone in the program is from Milwaukee, like myself.
Okay.
And so I'm interested in photography. I'm interested in oral history.
Okay.
So we kind of, for those who are not very familiar, we kind of see ourselves as kind of facilitators to conduct oral history interviews,
Mm-hmm.
Get the shots. But we want to compile it in a way so that again, it's meaningful for individuals who are actually part of it, or who have been, who have a history with the community.
Okay.
And so, my question to you, our question to you is, if you hear that a group of students are creating a short documentary film, what would you like to be a part of it, or is there a tone that what would you be looking forward to, or what aspect of it would you be interested in?
What would entice me to participate, or
Even that too.
okay.
Why did you agree to do this interview?
A number. Well, we heard about the interest in Downer and St. Mark's. I'm currently senior warden of the parish, so I thought it sounded like a nice opportunity to at least to get asked some questions and to offer my experiences of being a member at St. Mark's and interacting with the Downer community from that standpoint. I thought the approach that, in terms of as we saw it, was we thought of it as a really nice opportunity to interact, and from that standpoint, so we were pretty positive about interacting with this. I think the only reservations that we have about interacting with photographers and or other sorts of things is that the building itself has some, certainly the church, if you've walked through it and you have from the architectural standpoint, it's a really nice architecture, and we want to see it portrayed in, just from a backdrop of or positive effects and that sort of thing. Because it's an operating church, we're not interested in seeing it being used as a backdrop for a horror movie or something like that. But not that many people have shown up and says, "Oh, I want to shoot a horror movie in here." But we're interested in interacting with the community and with UWM. We have folks that go there. We have folks that teach there. We've got a group that is cooking from UWM, so we view that as one of our kind of natural partners in the community on the east side here. So we're interested in being helpful, and we also, I think of ourselves as being part of the history here, and having an opportunity to have a variety of us say, well, here's been our experience of doing this for the last 20, 30 some odd years. And we're actually just as a kind of one of those interesting happenstances, we have a group of folks that's just starting the let's go through the old documents and stuff for our 125th anniversary that'll come up in about 5 years. And so it's, you could kind of get used to thinking a little bit of the long term when you're involved in something like this. So we're interested in participating.
Thank you. Thank you for the interview.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was fun.
I hope so.
I hope you can make something of it.
No, it's great, honestly. But with each interview, I feel like it's odd. Like I've been here for a week, but I feel welcomed. I mean, it's great to hear these personal experiences because, Coffee Trader feels slowly is feeling more and more real to me.
Like, yeah, you have a lot. I'm sure you have a lot of people saying, that was that. For many folks, it's like, oh, that was such a cool place, and the palpable sense of, now what am I going to do?
Right.
Was a pretty kind of universal thing, and it slowly gotten replaced. So, okay, so I need to take. Let's see, I got this.
Yes.
And do I need to have any other copies of anything, etc.?
No.
Or you got all your stuff that you need?
Everything's set.
All right.
Could I ask you for one photo though? Could I ask
sure.
you for a photo of you?
Sure. Where do you want me to?
Could you actually sit right there? Yeah.
Okay.
And then I'll just take one shot. 1, 2, 3. One more.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
There we go. Oh, that looks good. Okay.
Great.
Good backdrop. All right.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Oh, you're very welcome.